Many of the creepiest mysteries lose a lot of their creepiness once they've finally been solved. There's something about the unknown that can be much scarier than any actual answer. But when mysteries defy explanation for decades or even centuries, their creepiness only increases. There may be ordinary answers to these unsolved crimes, but until those answers are found, they'll remain ominous and scary. Number 5. In 1991, a strange encounter caught the attention of UFO researchers and unexplained mysteries enthusiasts. Since then, the debate over whether this was a hoax or not has never been put to rest. The story started 2 years earlier, in November of 1989. On November 4th, residents in West Carleton, Ontario, witnessed a strange, unexplained sight. The incident took place in a rural part of the township, about 10 kilometers south of Carp. An intense, bright light was seen passing overhead and crashing into a swampy area. Livestock were scattered, and multiple witnesses reported seeing helicopters above the area where the object had crashed. One witness, a woman named Diane Labinek, claimed the helicopters were using bright lights to scan the ground beneath them. At first glance, this strange incident might be ruled as a meteorite impact. Most meteorite impacts go unnoticed, and by the time they reach the ground, the space rocks are relatively small. Even if one of the witnesses had gone out in search of the crashed object, they might not have noticed it, especially if they didn't know it was a space rock that they were looking for. But not long after the unexplained object was spotted, UFO researchers reviewed a strange letter from someone calling themselves Guardian. The letter sounded like the ramblings of a crazy person, but there was enough verifiable information in it for investigators to be sent to West Carleton in search for answers. Guardian explained that there had been many UFO sightings in Ontario throughout the 1980s, and pointed out the area's proximity to nuclear power stations. They then specifically mentioned the 1984 sighting. According to Guardian, at 8 p.m. on November 4th, Canadian Defense Department radars picked up a round object traveling over Carp, Ontario. It abruptly stopped and fell to the ground. Canadian and American personnel were sent to the area where it landed, a swampy area near Corkery Road. A gas was unleashed on the UFO to wipe out any life forms that may have been on the ship. Once the gas dispersed, soldiers went on board and recovered 3 crewmen. The letter went into detail about the ship, how it worked, and the technology on board. In particular, was a tiny brain implant that would allow the recipient to be monitored and controlled. Guardian alleged that the CIA would use this technology to continue the MKUltra experiments. Guardian also described the area where the UFO landed as triangular, and included a satellite map. That triangular area is still visible from satellite images today. When investigators arrived in West Carleton, they heard the stories from eyewitnesses but were unable to find any evidence of any UFO landing or anything strange happening. Given the rest of the story seemed so absurd, it was all chalked up to a hoax. Whoever Guardian was, they'd likely seen the unexplained object and then created the story surrounding it. For the next 2 years, nothing strange or out of the ordinary happened. Then another UFO was spotted. This sighting took place at just after 10 p.m. on August 10, 1991. Diane Labinek, one of the witnesses from the 1989 sighting, had just put her children to bed when she saw the strange incident. She was first alerted to the incident by the sound of her dogs barking at something. When she looked outside, she spotted what at first appeared to be a fire in one of the fields behind her home. There was a lot of smoke and bright red flames. It wasn't unusual for there to be fires out in the fields, but this one didn't behave like any she had seen before. It didn't spread, staying in one place. An unexplained object then came down next to the flames. It was disc-shaped and had a blue, bright flashing light on top of it. Another bright light shone from the bottom. It remained for about 10 minutes before it rose back into the air and disappeared behind some trees. At the exact same time, the flames disappeared. Another 10 minutes passed, and then a helicopter arrived on the scene. It flew low over the field, apparently searching for something, then passed over Diane's home and disappeared. The next day, Diane went out to try to see if she could find a source for the strange activity. In the fields, there were no signs of any fire or anything having landed. At this point, she told her husband, who'd been out running errands at the time of the incident, and her mother. She didn't believe anybody else would believe what had happened and didn't want to be ridiculed, so she didn't tell anybody else. But it would turn out that Diane wasn't the only person to see this mysterious incident. In 1992, UFO researchers in Canada and the United States received another package from Guardian. This one included a videotape marked only with the word Guardian and a fingerprint. The tape showed the same incident that Diane saw, matching up with her account exactly, but it then showed still shots of beings claimed to be aliens. These were extremely unbelievable, and it looked like people were wearing bad costumes. Also included in the package were documents that Guardian claimed were from the Department of National Defense. These documents were even more unbelievable than the previous letter, and described a theory involving China and nuclear weapons. The documents were riddled with errors and categorically denied by the Department of National Defense. While the documents and the photos seemed to be obvious fakes, the video seemed a lot more real. The clip was almost completely silent, with the only sound being barking from the dogs in the distance. If the scene was faked, it would have required power generators to create the lights, which would have caused considerable noise. It also would have left a mark on the field, and no such marks were found. Investigators returned to West Carleton and interviewed locals. Even before seeing the video, Diane described exactly what had been captured on the camcorder footage. It seemed that whatever had happened had really happened. At first, investigators weren't sure whether to believe Diane's story, but the more they talked to her, the more they were convinced that she was telling the truth. Other residents also reported helicopters in the area. The helicopters weren't only spotted on the night of the UFO, but frequently flew over the area. There was a flying training area about 30 miles west of the sighting, and the military claimed there was no reason for helicopters to be flying so low over residential areas. Witnesses described the helicopters as being black, green, or maroon in color. The video was featured on a 1993 episode of the TV show Unsolved Mysteries, which claimed it was the first time the general public had seen it. Since then, experts have been split on the authenticity. Some still believe something unexplained was generally caught on camera. Others believe that the object was actually a pickup truck similar to one owned by Diane's nephew. They claim the whole thing was a hoax, which Diane may or may not have been involved in. It's possible that the only person who knows the truth is the person calling themselves the Guardian. One thing most people agree on is that the Guardian didn't simply stumble across the UFO scene. The individual had to have prior knowledge that something was going to take place. One person who may have been the Guardian was a man named Bobby. Bobby was a friend of the Labanaks and a UFO enthusiast. He was allegedly previously using the pseudonym Guardian and was evasive when researchers asked to compare his fingerprints to the prints found on the tape. Guardian's identity remains a mystery. What exactly Diane and other residents saw in 1989 and 1981 is also unsolved. While it seems unlikely that most, if any, of what the Guardian wrote about is actually true, something unexplained was spotted in the area, and the incidents remain unsolved. Number 4. In 2018, an otherwise ordinary couple living in Wales reported hearing strange noises coming from beneath their home. 5 years later, what they heard is still a strange and creepy mystery. Alan and Christine Tate had been living in their home in Ammonford for 11 years when the sounds began. Up until that point, nothing out of the ordinary had happened. There had been an issue with one neighbor who had been doing renovation work and disrupted some of the other neighbors, but other than that, it was just a normal home in a small Welsh town. For the Tates, it was a perfect location. It was located on a main road, but visitors would need to travel through a small alley to get from the road to the entrance of their home. It gave the house a secluded feel and shielded them from the general noise from the street. Nothing strange or out of the ordinary happened until June of 2018, when Christine heard what sounded like something flushing. They searched for the source of the noise, and Alan set up a recording device in the bathroom to try to get to the bottom of the strange sound. The couple didn't just pick up the sound of flushing, but all manner of strange noises. They believed the noises were coming from the house next door, which stood empty at the time. They also theorized that it might have had something to do with the drainage system, as a foul smell was emanating from the drains. But when they lifted the drain cover, they couldn't find the source of the noise. Alan set up multiple recording devices around the home and got some disturbing results. It wasn't only flushing, but the sound of machinery running, sirens, motorbikes, and people arguing and screaming. Strangely, some of the noises could only be heard through one of the recording devices, which was located near the alleyway. The devices at the front and back of the house didn't record any sounds. The Tates were truly disturbed by what they heard and contacted the police. They didn't believe that this was anything paranormal. Instead, they believed something illegal was going on near their home. The police listened to the tapes but dismissed the case. The noises continued. Some could only be heard on the tapes, which only caused more confusion. It became clear that the noises were coming from below the ground. The Tates had a basement, but when they went down there, they found that the noises were still coming from beneath them. Alan dug 2 channels over a meter long into the sides of the basement and placed the recording devices inside. Now the noises were clearer than ever. The couple believes that people are being held against their will in a tunnel beneath their home. They decided to leave their home and have been too terrified to return since. Instead, they've lived in a camper van, traveling around Wales and northern England and sharing leaflets about their ordeal. The campaign attracted the attention of the local press. Some reporters visited the site and lowered microphones into the basement. By this point, the basement had been completely sealed and was only accessible through a hole in the ground. These reporters recorded no strange noises or anything out of the ordinary. But Alan claims that 18 months after the first recording, independent investigators were also able to record strange sounds from the basement. Alan has been critical of the police response to the strange noises. The police agreed to search the house next door, but according to Alan, gave the owners 6 weeks warning. By the time they arrived, the house was empty except for a safe that could not be opened. But this detail was left out of the police report. The authorities claimed that the noises are just normal noises from the street. It's worth noting that there are playing fields and tennis courts behind the home, which could be the source of some of the shouts and screams. Some who have listened to the noises claim the screams aren't from people in terror or pain, but instead from people having fun. Interestingly, there's also a church around the corner from the Tates' home. Behind the church is a graveyard, located about 100 meters away from the Tates' house. The most recent burial there took place in 2008. While the Tates don't believe anything supernatural is responsible for the strange noises, if something from beyond the grave was responsible, it's possible that this might be the source. The problem with outside sources being the cause of the noise is the 3 recording devices Alan set up. If the noises were coming from the street or the fields behind the home, they would have been loudest on the devices at the front and back of the house, rather than the one at the side. Alan also claims that the sound of the screams was recorded in the middle of the night when there wouldn't have been anybody in the park. The idea that secret tunnels are hidden beneath the home isn't entirely a crazy idea. There are local legends about tunnels that link the Carleton Castle and the Ammonford Motte and Bailey. The 2 locations are roughly 5 miles apart as the crow flies. While a straight tunnel from the castle to the Motte and Bailey wouldn't pass beneath the Tates' home, it also wouldn't be too much of a detour. The tunnels are only legends. At this point, though, many local residents claim to have seen them as children while exploring the castle. In 2013, local newspapers reported on a group that was trying to rediscover the tunnels. This was only shortly before the Tates began hearing strange noises. Many believe the Tates suffered from paranoia. While the noises are definitely real, it doesn't necessarily mean they're anything mysterious. Sound can travel in strange ways that can make it hard to pinpoint where it's coming from. The Tates have denied any mental health problems. At one point, Christine Tate was taken to a hospital, and a toxicology report showed negative for carbon monoxide poisoning, which some have suggested might be the cause of the strange noises. Alan Tate points to the alleged illegal behavior of his neighbors for the noise, and continues to campaign for answers to this creepy mystery. Number 3. Even with our modern technology, the past still holds countless unsolved mysteries about the history of the human race. The further back in time we go, the more mysterious these civilizations are. The earliest known writing comes from the ancient Sumerian people of Mesopotamia. But the Sumerians weren't the first civilization to inhabit that land. To go back further, we go into prehistory. Thousands of years before the Sumerians, there were the Ubaid people, an even more mysterious culture that was only rediscovered in 1919. The discovery took place in an area called Tel al-Ubaid. By the 20th century, it was little more than a mound, about a half a kilometer in length. But buried beneath it were the secrets of an ancient past. Over the years, we've learned a little more about the Ubaid people, but some of the earliest discoveries still remain a creepy mystery. The Ubaid period lasted from 5500 BC to 3700 BC. Given how long a period of time that is, and the interactions with other cultures in Mesopotamia at the time, it's hard to pin down what exactly Ubaid culture was. It's believed to have started in the extreme south of what is today Iran, near the coast, but had influences from other cultures. It then spread north. Over the 1800 years, there was a lot of change in the area. Agriculture existed in the area, but with the Ubaid people, there was the beginning of urbanization. Small villages of mud houses turned into towns. Public monuments and temples were built. Along with this came the beginnings of class culture. Everything we know about the Ubaid period comes from the artifacts that were left behind, and what little can be interpreted from the writing that came afterward. They had no writing systems themselves, so details about how these changes and practices came about have been lost and will remain a mystery. But one of the strangest mysteries to come from the Ubaid period was particularly early on. During the exploration of Tel al-Ubaid, archaeologists found strange statues. The statues date back between 4500 and 4000 BC, during an era known as Ubaid IV, or late Ubaid-style ceramics. They were only roughly 14 centimeters long, hand-carved and made from fired clay. The statues depicted thin figures with broad shoulders who appeared to be wearing shoulder pads and helmets. They had a conical base, which would have allowed them to be stood upright. Many also had simple patterns in black paint on their shoulders or torsos, which are believed to represent tattoos. But strangest of all was the figures' heads. They had elongated skulls, long snout-like faces, and thin lines for eyes. Some figures were found at Tel al-Ubaid, but others were located at Uruk and Ur, a city that the Sumerians would later describe as the first city. They earned the nickname the Lizard Men statues, but what or who these figures were meant to represent has long remained a mystery. When it comes to objects, especially statues that cannot be explained, one of the first things that comes to mind is a possible religious or spiritual significance to them. This seems to make sense given that they've been able to stand upright unsupported. The British Museum website also notes that one of the statues appears to have had its head removed on purpose, which could have been part of some ritual. The figures all have unique poses. Some held staffs or scepters, which have been interpreted as symbols of justice and ruling. Others were women feeding infants. The mundane poses that the statues held led researchers to believe that they weren't for ceremonial purposes. That doesn't mean that they weren't necessarily religious or spiritual in nature. Some have suggested that they were meant to represent gods. We don't know how the Ubaid people depicted their gods, but the later Sumerian culture depicted their gods as human-like, with faces that resembled humans. We actually know which gods were the patron gods of these cities, at least in the later periods. None of these gods were depicted as lizard creatures. This was in contrast to the Egyptians, where many gods were depicted with animal heads. It seems unlikely that the statues were meant to depict the Ubaid gods. Some believe the statues were supposed to represent the Ubaid people themselves. Recent discoveries showed that the people of this area practiced head shaping. Bandages would be wound tightly around the head to deform part of the skull, creating an elongating effect. The practice is still part of the traditions of some people around the world. However, this wouldn't explain why the infants in the statues already had elongated skulls. It also wouldn't explain the snout-like noses or the strange eye shapes. A more fringe theory is that these were interpretations of the Austronesians from Southeast Asia. The Austronesians were the ancestors of the Polynesians. Like the Polynesians, they were excellent sailors, and it's speculated that they may have made their way from Southeast Asia to Mesopotamia. The strange art could be an attempt to depict these people. This is an unlikely theory, though. Most historians don't believe the Austronesians made it to Madagascar until 5,000 years after these statues were created. Another mundane answer is that this was simply a strange art style that was popular for a period of time. We know little about the culture and what stories were being passed down through spoken stories. These could have just been strange decorations. It's possible that the creepy mystery may one day be solved. There's still a lot about the Ubaid people and later cultures from the area that we still don't even know about. Even something as simple as where these people came from remains a mystery. Solving that mystery could lead us to uncover the cultures that influenced the Ubaid people, which could point us to an answer to this creepy mystery. But it's also possible that any hope of finding an answer was lost thousands of years ago. Number 2. The disappearance of the ship, the Madagascar, is one of the most puzzling maritime mysteries in the 19th century. The creepy mystery includes everything from people searching for a new life to stolen treasure, and has attracted the attention of treasure hunters for more than 100 years. The Madagascar was a Blackwall frigate, a 3-masted ship that was owned by George and Henry Green. It was primarily a merchant ship and sailed from 1837 to 1852 between Britain and India. But in March of 1853, it started a new voyage. At the time in England, there was a serious imbalance between the numbers of men and women. There were approximately 500,000 more women than men, which was having a negative impact on women's wages. There simply wasn't enough good-paying work to go around, and many found themselves doing needlework. In the early 1840s, reports exposed the horrible conditions needlewomen were forced to live and work in. What followed was a movement to try to get the government to improve the lives of these women. One of those campaigns came in the form of a letter from the Right Honorable Sidney Herbert. Herbert suggested a scheme that helped women immigrate to Australia. Australia also had an imbalance between the two genders, with far more men having traveled there either as convicts or in the gold rush. A fund was put together from donations which allowed women to make the trip to Australia. There, wages for needlework could be as much as 3 times what women were making in London. The wages for other work were also significantly greater in the colony. In March of '53, Madagascar began its first trip bringing these female immigrants to Australia. The ship arrived in Melbourne on June 10th and began to prepare for the return journey. That was immediately made harder when 14 crew members jumped ship to take part in the gold rush. Advertisements were put out in local papers looking for replacements, as well as advertising space for passengers making the return journey to London. Passengers were relatively easy to find, but the captain struggled to make up the crew numbers. In the end, only 3 replacements were signed on. What should have been a crew of 60 was only a crew of 49. This caused delays in setting sail. Twice, a launch had to be delayed due to poor weather conditions. This likely caused frustration for the passengers on board, especially those most eager to get out of Melbourne. On July 20th, 1853, in the village of Mia Mia, an armed robbery took place. A cart carrying crates of gold and cash was being taken from the MacIver diggings to Carleton. There, the plan was for it to catch the official escort to Melbourne. With the cart were 5 guards and a driver. As they reached the village, they found a tree had toppled onto the path. It was then that the cart was ambushed by 24 men with weapons. 3 of the guards were seriously injured, and the robbers managed to take the gold and flee into the brush. About 400 diggers joined the search for the bushrangers, but they left behind little evidence of where they were going or who they were. Among the bushrangers were John and George Francis. They had made their way to Melbourne with their share of the gold and were among the passengers on board the Madagascar waiting for it to set sail. But gold wasn't the only thing that John had stolen. Around the same time as the MacIver escort robbery, a man filed a complaint about a stolen weapon. He believed a man living in a tent next to him was responsible. Police searched the tent but found it had already been abandoned. On the floor, they discovered paperwork for a Mr. J. Francis's voyage on the Madagascar. Before the ship could leave port, the police went aboard to arrest John. A search of his cabin located the missing weapon, but there was nothing connecting him to the gold robbery. That was because their gold had been stored in George's cabin. Unfortunately for the brothers, the police would later search George's cabin and uncover the gold. George Francis confessed to the police and gave the names of all but 2 of his companions. Those 2 were unknown to him. All but 1 of the named men were arrested, but not all of the gold was uncovered. After all the drama, the Madagascar finally set sail on August 12, 1853. She disappeared over the horizon, planning to make the journey under Cape Horn and across the Atlantic to England, but she was never seen again. Over the following years, there were many theories and rumors about what happened to the Madagascar. Some were relatively mundane, such as striking an iceberg. Her planned route would have taken her through the Drake Passage, which is an unpredictable stretch of water between South America and Antarctica. Other theories suggest that the wool cargo the ship was carrying may have spontaneously combusted. No wreckage has ever been found to confirm this theory, though. Others believe that other cargo aboard the ship may have caused the disappearance. Exactly how much gold was on board the ship differs between news sources. One estimate places it at 2 tons, which was worth about 240,000 pounds at the time, or about 31 million today. That didn't include any gold that the passengers themselves might have brought on board. The theory suggests that some criminals on board decided to seize control of the ship. The gold was stolen and the ship was scuttled, dooming those on board. The theory was only helped when the account of an officer sent to arrest John Francis was published in 1910. The officer described a terrifying scene on board the ship, with drunkenness and fighting being commonplace. He claimed that the crew was made up of the most villainous and motley that had ever signed articles on Capston's head. He also said that some of the passengers were escaped convicts. How much of this account was the truth is unknown, though there are some accounts of passengers deciding to leave the Madagascar after the Francis brothers were arrested, fearing some other criminals might have managed to escape capture on the ship. Over the decades, there were a few confessions from people claiming to know what happened. One came from a former nurse who passed away in New Zealand. She claimed that some passengers and crew members mutinied and destroyed the ship off the coast of South America. Only the nurse and 2 other men survived. The creepy mystery has caught the attention of treasure hunters, certain that millions of pounds worth of gold is still hidden, either in South America, Australia, or in the ocean in between. The wreckage of the Madagascar has never been found, and the fate of her passengers may forever remain a mystery. Number 1. On the border between Austria and Germany lies Untersberg, a mountain that's been the focus of legends and mystics for more than 1,000 years. Even those who don't believe in the supernatural stories about the mountain can uncover mysteries that may never be solved. People have been giving the mountain a spiritual importance since Celtic times. Why these ancient people believed the mountain was more significant than any of the others in the area is a mystery. The mountain is made from limestone, and over the millennia, a network of cave systems has been etched into the rock. So far, about 400 caves have been discovered, including the largest known cave in Germany. Its known length is over 12 miles, and it dives to a depth of 3,700 feet. In 2008, a team of researchers set out to map the cave, or at least to explore its deepest reaches. They navigated a narrow section that had previously been impossible to squeeze through, but the cave had widened out. An underground lake was discovered, and the researchers floated across on a boat that they had brought with them. But at a depth of 3,464 feet, they had to turn back. They had reached an abyss-like precipice and could not go any further. Researchers have continued to explore the cave. In 2012, the cave system made the news when a speleologist had to be recovered from the cave. Johann Westhauser and 2 other researchers were exploring when he was wounded in a rock fall while exploring more than 32 feet underground. A multinational effort brought the scientist back to the surface after 12 days and drew the attention to the mysterious caves. One professor from a nearby university described the caves of Untersberg as the last undiscovered continent, and discovering new territory would make the explorer a modern Christopher Columbus. But security personnel warned tourists not to try to become that explorer. Johann was an experienced caver and became trapped. He was rescued, but many who disappear on the mountain aren't so lucky. With so many mysterious caves, as well as the attention it's been receiving since ancient times, it's unsurprising that many people have become lost on the mountain. Some are quickly found, though, in surprisingly good condition for the ordeal that they've gone through. But others remain hidden in the mountains for decades. In 2014, the remains of a man who had gone missing in 1929 were uncovered by a geologist in one of Untersberg's caves. The man, known as Carl K., went missing while skiing in March of 1929. It's believed that he had an accident and was unable to return home to Salzburg. The discovery gives hope to those who have lost people to the mountain, that at least they might one day get answers to the mystery. But the most mysterious disappearances aren't the ones that go unsolved. On August 14, 1987, 3 friends went missing on the mountain. Herman, his wife Maria, and their friend Monica had gone for a hike on the Untersberg. When they didn't come home that evening, their loved ones alerted the police and a search commenced. Search teams found their car in the parking lot and a blouse which was speculated as belonging to Monica near the cave's entrance. It wasn't uncommon for people to leave items of clothing outside caves, so that if they went missing, it would mark where they had disappeared. But no other trace of the 3 people was found. 3 months passed without answers. Then family members received a strange phone call. It was from Herman, Maria, and Monica. They were on a ship in the Red Sea heading towards Egypt. According to the missing people, they had blacked out after entering the cave. They had no memory of how they'd gotten to the boat or what happened to them over the past 3 months. At least one of the 3 didn't have a passport, but when they arrived in Egypt, they were allowed into the country. They traveled to the German consulate in Alexandria, where they received emergency documents and were allowed to travel home to Germany. Things took another strange twist once they arrived home. The story changed completely. The trio said that they had parked on the mountain, but then walked from there to a train station. They didn't enter any of the mysterious caves at all. Instead, they had traveled to Austria with plans to go mountain climbing there. At one point, they passed from Austria into Yugoslavia. As Monica didn't have her passport, they began to panic about the Yugoslavia border control and fled from the border. This news story claimed that they'd traveled through 6 countries by foot, with at least one person missing a passport. Somehow, they had accidentally crossed a very tightly controlled border, but didn't think that they would be able to go back through unnoticed. The story was as strange as the first one. What really happened remains unexplained to this day. Some people believe that there are portals in the mountains or areas that cause time slips. Rather than disappearing off the face of the earth when people vanish in the mountains, they instead disappear in time. Herman, Maria, and Monica were lucky to slip into a place in time that was possible to return from. Their story isn't the only one of people getting lost on the mountain, only to reappear sometime later. One story claims that in 1738, a hunter named Michael Holzager disappeared on the mountain. Despite numerous searches, no trace of him could ever be found. A year and a day after he vanished, a memorial was held in his hometown. Michael walked in on the memorial with no memory of the year having passed. There are plenty of other mysterious theories about the mountain. The comparison of the cave systems to an undiscovered continent makes it easy to imagine people living uncontacted on that continent. The folklore surrounding dwarves that allegedly live in the mountain dates back for centuries. Interestingly, the dwarves are described very similarly to the common gray alien stereotype. They're short, with large heads and gray faces. Throughout history, there have been many stories of people encountering these strange creatures. Sometimes they're friendly and simply want to continue on their marches. In other cases, they may make people they encounter disappear. The stories of the dwarves are by far the most outlandish of the mysterious tales of Untersberg. But if they're interpreted as the same extraterrestrial beings as the gray aliens, they could tie the whole creepy mystery of the mountain together. Whether it's extraterrestrial beings, portals, or simply the unexplored and undiscovered caves, Untersberg is filled with mysteries and will continue to attract people who want to solve them for centuries to come. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.